and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies Tier List video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S down to C tier. The current meta is really diverse and there's really no traits that are dominating over others. That means that there's not much of a power gap between each tier for today's list. We'll be ranking each synergy on how strong it is relative to the other traits, how essential it is or isn't for top 4 compositions, and lastly, how popular it is currently. With all that said, let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to start it off, we have the S tier synergies. This tier consists of Rebels, Mystic, Mech-Pilot, Cybernetics, and Astro Sniper. Basically, all of these traits have a consistent place in the meta and are capable of getting top 3 placements. Up first for the S tier synergies, we have Rebels. Rebels are overall still one of the strongest traits in the game, which makes sense considering there really wasn't much of a balance patch between 10.16 and 10.17. While they aren't always going to be the best synergy in every game, they have the potential to do extremely well in both early and late game comps. This is due to the strength of Ziggs, Malphite, and additional Rebel as the trio of champions that do well against most early game boards. Add in Rumble to pair with the Rebels, and you're going to be on your way to cruising through Stage 3. Late game is really where Rebels shine though, between the 6-piece trait itself and the units. Notably, we're talking about Jinx and Aurelion Sol. Ziggs also provides Demolitionist for Gangplank, which is another important unit for late game Rebels. All in all, this trait is flexible throughout the early game, does okay in the mid game, and ends with a strong late game. The next synergy to talk about is Mystic. We'll keep it short here because now we all know that Mystic is still the best splash trait in the game. In particular for 10.17 and 10.16, it's been essential because of the amount of magic damage we see in practically every comp. You really can't beat giving a team-wide buff of magic resist for only 2 champions. Mech-Pilot is still in a state of flux after the hotfix nerfs it received shortly after 10.17 was released. But the fact that it was nerfed and is still doing well in the meta shows how good the trait is. The Super Mech is just so hard to kill when you deck it out with defensive items, and it does a ton of damage that makes it one of the best frontline options. Additionally, the secondary traits of the Mech-Pilot are also useful. Pair Victor with Annie for 2 Sorcerers to give your team just a bit more oomph in their magic damage. Add in Shaco or Echo to give your Super Mech a bit more attack speed, and of course you can play Ziggs or Gangplank to get the best trait for the mech, Demolitionist. We do want to point out that while the Mech-Pilot trait does still seem to be doing well, there may be a shift in the meta at some point due to the nerfs that lower its priority. It may or may not happen, but it's worth keeping in mind. Up next, we have Cybernetics. We finally graduated Cybernetics from being at the top of A tier to being an S tier because this trait is just so darn consistent. Throughout the entirety of Set 3, 6 Cybernetics has been a viable comp. Granted, the strength of the synergy has gone up and down, but it's almost always been a build that you can pick up and play regardless of the meta. Another reason for this synergy doing well is its early game. With Lucian, Fiora, and Leona, you have a strong 3-piece trait that can carry you through to the mid game. Even late game, this trait does well due to the strength of Vayne as your carry, Mana Reaver with Aurelia and Thresh, and of course Echo. And the last trait in the S tier is Astro Sniper. Once again, we're pairing these 2 synergies together because you really don't see them played separately very often. Occasionally, Sniper will get played with Vayne and Cybernetics or Jhin in a Dark Stars build, but the bulk of the time it's going to be with Astro. These 2 traits are still near the top of the meta as they really haven't received any balance changes. The main downside to them is that the champions are so expensive to get the composition up and running as it requires several 4-cost champions. But the strength of this build can overcome that as you get a good mix of magic and physical damage alongside of a lot of crowd control. Let's move on now and talk about the synergies in the A tier. This consists of Vanguard, Star Guardian, Sorcerer, Demolitionist, Infiltrator, Starship, and Paragon. The synergies in this tier are consistently strong and are often paired with top traits to form some of the best compositions in the current meta. At the top of the A tier, we have Vanguards. Vanguards have fallen off a bit in terms of value as they aren't the only available frontline anymore. Brawlers, Protectors, and a mix of champions can do well enough right now, so while Vanguards are still the best frontline option, they aren't monopolizing it anymore. That said, you're going to see a ton of compositions running 2 to 4 Vanguard throughout the early and mid game because of how strong the trait is. Not to mention, the champions themselves are really good at different stages of the game. Our next two synergies pair well together, with the first being Star Guardian. Star Guardians are in an interesting spot in the meta. Outside of the build Star Guardian Sorcerer, you're not going to see the synergy get much value, but you will see some of the champions do well. Janna, Neeko, and Soraka can all get value, but the trait itself really only shines when you have 6 Star Guardians together. The reason is mainly due to how Syndra functions. The mana generation ramps up her damage over time, making her one of the strongest mid-game carries. Syndra is also aided by our next trait, Sorcerers. Star Guardian and Sorcerer do go hand in hand most of the time, but the value of splashing in 2 Sorcerers should not be understated. It can fit into multiple compositions, but most commonly you'll see it in a mech build. It's intrinsically going to get value as a trait because 20% bonus spell power benefits basically every single champion in the game, and you get that for just 2 champions. Sure, a lot of this synergy's worth is tied to Star Guardian, but it's still a worthwhile pickup even without that secondary trait. We've already briefly mentioned Demolitionist earlier when talking about Rebels and Mech-Pilot, so we don't need to ramble on about them too long. Basically, Ziggs, Rumble, and Gangplank are all important pieces in the meta. Demolitionist increases their value by a ton due to the crowd control it provides, making it a valuable asset in the build using those 3 champions. Next, we have Infiltrators. This trait is doing well mainly due to the champions. Fizz, Echo, and Shaco are all amazing and do well in various comps. Shaco is a strong mid-game carry, Echo wrecks the late game, and Fizz is just an all-around solid champion. Our last 2 traits for the A tier are both single champion synergies. First is Starship, also known as Aurelion Sol. Aurelion does a lot in the late game due to the mana drain of his ability, making him an essential part of the Rebels composition. He does have plenty of value on his own, but he's mostly seen paired with Rebels. Paragon, or Janna, is more distinct than the Starship. What that means is that Janna on her own is way more valuable than the Paragon trait. In fact, you can practically ignore what the Paragon trait provides, as it's much less valuable than Janna's ultimate, which provides both crowd control and increased attack speed. That said, it still can be useful as a synergy, especially with Star Guardian Sorcerer being a top build. Moving along, we have the B tier synergies. This consists of Blaster, Brawler, Chrono, Darkstar, Space Pirate, Blademaster, and Protector. These are either support traits or traits that can do well in the right situation. Up first, we have Blaster. This is basically a trait designed to help Jinx, and that's about it. Early game, it's good for Lucian, and there's some value in running it with Battlecast, but at the end of the day, you're mainly only going to see it when Jinx is the carry. Brawler is a trait that does well enough in the meta due to the champions themselves. Gnar is commonly played in quite a few builds, Vi is important for Cybernetics, and early game, you'll get a lot of value out of Malphite and Illaoi. Blitzcrank always has value due to his crowd control, but does struggle to find a place in the meta. It's an all-around solid frontline synergy. At this point of set 3, it's safe to say that Chrono is the second best splash trait. It's so commonly played, you're going to see multiple players having it every single game. The bonus attack speed at the start of the fight is great, but Chrono does get less value the longer games go on, as fights tend to get shorter. That said, Chrono is definitely a top tier splash trait. Darkstars have made a bit of a comeback, with the 4-piece synergy being used with either Shaco or Jhin as the carry. Outside of that, you're mainly only going to run 2 Darkstars to buff either Jhin or Xerath. The issue with this synergy is that it's great for a select few champions, and that's about it. So committing a lot of your board to increase the value of its buff is often not worth it. It's not a bad trait, it's just less flexible than a lot of others. Space Pirate has found a weird niche in the meta. It's a great early game synergy, especially with Jace, and can be played mid to late game if you manage to find a Gangplank early on. It has the mid game power spike where you can get a lot of value from 4 Space Pirates before transitioning out of it. But it's too inconsistent to be a top trait, which is why it's near the end of the B tier. Blademaster basically only has value for Master Yi carry and Slash Bros. It does help Xayah for Shredder, but that build is much less common than Slash Bros right now. Outside of those 2 builds, you're at best going to see it in Cybernetics, but it's really not doing much there. Basically, if you want to run this trait, play Master Yi carry. The last synergy for B tier is Protector. Protectors are actually really good, they're just not as reliable as the other sources of frontline. Neeko is definitely a top tier champion, but she really doesn't need this trait to do well. Bottom line for Protectors is that you're going to do fine with them as your frontline, but will likely transition away from them in the mid to late game. And the last tier for today is the C tier. This consists of Mercenary, Battlecast, Celestial, and Mana Reaver. These synergies can provide value in the right situation, but are overall not as valuable as the other traits. First is Mercenary, which is really only useful because of Double Strike. The other two upgrades really don't matter for Gangplank. Overall, this trait is just too expensive, but as we said, Double Strike is incredibly valuable and worth spending the 8 gold for. Next is Battlecast, a synergy that has never really found its place in the meta. Sure, it can do well, but overall you're not going to see this synergy get nearly as much value as the others. As we're near the end of set 3, it's safe to say that this trait as a whole never really did as well as it potentially could have. Celestial being down at the bottom of the tier list may seem harsh, but the value it provides compared to other splash traits is just not that much. It's useful, yes, but nowhere near as useful as Mystic, Chrono, or Sorcerer. In general, Celestial is more or less a synergy that you just happen to have and not one that you go out of your way to add into your comp. And the last trait for today's tier list is Mana Reaver. Again, like Celestial, this seems like a harsh placement, but outside of Cybernetics, it's really difficult to make this synergy work. It all stems from the removal of Cassin, who really kept this trait relevant for a long time. That said, we do want to stress that Mana Reaver can be amazing. The only reason we have it so low in the tier list is how difficult it is to fit in most comps. And that is all we have for today's tier list video. We're nearly at the end of set 3, so don't expect the meta to shake up much from now until the end of 10.18. The meta we see today will likely persist through these last few weeks. Let us know in the comment section below if you think any trait should be higher or lower on the list. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.